This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW. Written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 405, part 2, entitled A Masculist U-Turn on Third Wave, that is empowerment, feminism. Carrying straight on. This 6-year maternity benefit will cost a country many billions of dollars a year, so will not be a light undertaking, so will be resisted by conservatives. In order to force the politicians to legislate such quotas and to pay the huge costs of maternity premium that last 6 years, the political, moral and economic pressure on them will need to be very powerful, which is why men, and particularly demographically, politically minded masculists, need to join forces with the third wave feminists to achieve these goals. How might this be done? Our first step that the masculists need to undertake is to overcome their very negative attitudes towards third wave feminists. Until my own recent U-turn in my attitudes towards third wave feminists, I too had such very negative attitudes towards them, which is easily understandable given what the fluffy feminists are doing in the divorce courts. These fluffy feminist hypocrites are out to empower women at the expense of men by financially crucifying men in the divorce courts, and hence have become indirect genociders, indirectly wiping out whole populations, having made divorce so toxic for men that millions of men around the world are wiping their hands of marriage and paternity. These hated fluffy feminist hypocrites want their cake and to eat it too. They are hypocrites in the sense that they want equal rights with men in the parliaments, but reject equal obligations with men in the divorce courts, expecting to behave as fluffy parasites. These fluffy feminists have achieved power over men in the sense that they now have the legal power to screw men financially in the divorce courts, without any moral nor legal obligation on them to fip up and to not parasite of the money and labour of a man. This massive gender political injustice screams out for reform. Not surprisingly, masculists have an utter hatred for what the fluffy feminists are doing to men in the divorce courts, and have no tolerance with the third wave feminists' idea of empowering women at men's expense. It's therefore not surprising that most masculists despise third wave feminists. I had similar feelings until I started thinking hard about the relationship between the masculists and the demographic politicians. I now have mixed feelings towards the empowerment of feminists. I despise what they are doing in the divorce courts and see that if things don't change, there will be a sex war between the masculists and the fluffy feminists, which in the limit will result in the deaths of a large number of misandrist fluffy feminists who are seen by the masculists as indirect genociders who have to be stopped, with bullets if necessary. However, fortunately, not all third wave feminists are pushing for female empowerment at men's expense. Some actually agree with the main ideas of the masculists and consider themselves to be female masculists, for the same kind of reasons why many men consider themselves male feminists, namely for reasons of humanitarian fairness, for ethical reasons. Masculists are second-wave male feminists, since masculists don't just encourage women to fip up, but demand it, since if women are not fips, well then they're fluffies, and hence manslavers, hence slavers, and thus hated by masculists, who are out to eliminate fluffies from the earth by punishing them so severely that such women rot on the shelf and die out, taking their fluffy parasite genes with them, thus removing their fluffy parasite genes from the gene pool. Once masculists have spread their ideas via the media to the masses, so that millions of women are exposed to masculist aims and ideas, there will be millions of female masculists who agree with the masculists that men are being crucified in the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce courts, that men should have the para, since women already have the mara, that fluffies parasite off men for decades, thus oppressing men far worse than vice versa. Masculists can work with female masculists by encouraging female masculists to vote with men to men-fair the gender laws so that men are prepared to be fathers again. Even women who are not female masculists can still be pressured to vote with men for the men-fairing of the gender laws by threatening them with babylessness, since the quality men that these young women want to mate with can be told by the masculists that men are refusing to give them their sperm because of the toxicity of the divorce courts taken over by the hated fluffy feminist hypocrites, thus making marriage and paternity such a shitty deal for men that 2/3 of young men in many countries now reject marriage and paternity, preferring the MGTOW, that's men going their own way, lifestyle of spending their money on themselves and only dating and penising women, utterly refusing to be parasited upon by a despised fluffy. Thus, the more thoughtful of feminist and masculist thinkers ought to be putting their heads together and dreaming up ways to socially engineer society so that both sexes benefit, producing a win-win solution, and so that whole populations are not wiped out. For women and feminists, this means they need to become more female masculist, pushing for the men-fairing of the gender laws by voting with men for this men-fairing, for reform of the divorce courts, for legislation of the para, etc. Similarly for men and masculists, who need to become more male feminist in pushing for the legislation of hiring quotas for women in employment so that governments give women the maternity benefit over 6 years, so that women are not discouraged from being mothers, thus helping to raise the birth rate to the replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman. A man will be more likely to commit to a woman who wants kids if he knows that the government will pay her a wage while she stays at home raising her small kids. Once the kids are weaned, governments should allow fathers to have paternity days so they can stay at home for a day a week to bond with his kids when they are small. These ideas need to be thought out in more detail and from both sides, that is, from both masculist and feminist viewpoints. So far, the feminists who have thought about wages for stay-at-home mothers have thought largely only from the female feminist point of view, which has not included the interests of men and the masculists. What needs to be done is to put female masculist and male feminist heads together to dream up practical schemes that allow women to be careerists and mothers, that allow men not to be exploited by parasitic fluffies and financially massacred in the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce courts, and that allow the demographic politicians to achieve their goal of preventing whole populations from wiping themselves out. This is a big topic and requires a lot of thought. Expect more masculist flyers on this theme in the future. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Manslaves to Women, an e-textbook of 400 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.